Greetings, Ericsson family. Welcome back to the second of two conversations we're having for Black History Month and the Ericsson African American Alliance. I'm Jay Wiggins with Marketing and Communications. That's one thing I neglected to say in the first podcast, so I want to properly introduce myself. I have another great panel here joining me today. I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Tony Caesar here.
Hey, I'm Mr. Tony Caesar, or Tony Caesar as they call. I'm the head of IT here for Ericsson North America, as well as one of the co-chairs for the African American Alliance.
Hi everyone, Renita Sanders. I do sourcing, marketing, communications.
Hi, this is Roger Quay. I'm an engineer for the new product introduction team.
Tamala Hill. I'm a partner account manager, and I am the strategic events lead for the African American Alliance.
Perfect. And again, I just want to echo what I said in the first one. The Ericsson African American Alliance is doing a fantastic job this year during Black History Month and just throughout the year with the events that they hold and things of that nature. So proud to be a part of this and bring some of these conversations to light. So today's topic is being Black in a tech telecom space. So kind of want to get you all's perspectives on, how you feel about that. We got a nice mix of, some seasoned employees and then some newer employees. So let's, who wants to start off? How does it feel to be Black in the tech telecom space? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm going to jump in on that, Jay. I will actually step back and saying being Black in any major organization, tech, telecom, or wherever you work, it's a very challenging place to be at times, given that 9 times out of 10, especially the senior leadership positions, there's not a lot of people that look like me, right? And you go into boardrooms or meetings and you're looking around the room and you're the only one. I think being in a tech organization really doesn't make any difference. It's the same types of scenarios where there are times when you feel like you are the only one. And it's hard sometimes to what I call be your authentic self, right? Because you have to wear a mask, I call it, this face that you put on to get along inside that room with other people. I used to call it saying, hey, I don't want to make people uncomfortable, right? Be my authentic self. Mm-hmm. But I think now at this point in my career, not that I don't care that they're uncomfortable, but I care more that I'm uncomfortable not being my authentic self. And I find where I'm really focused now on being myself, whatever that means, right? Again, we're going to do things in a respectful way. But, being here in this particular company, there is what I call a good awareness at the senior leadership level. And while, they say you can't cure cancer overnight, I can tell you the surgeons are working.
That's a great analogy. Anybody else? Who else wants to jump in?
I have a question to expand on that. So when you say wear a mask, do you feel as though you're still wearing that mask? And if not, what led to you taking the mask off?
I've been in the industry for a long time, many years, more than I care to tell you guys. And even when I came to Ericsson 4.5 years ago, I will admit I was still wearing my mask. I was still being that person that they expect you to be inside those rooms. And I think it wasn't until I took the leap in taking on a co-chair role at the African American Alliance where I realized I was representing more than just myself. I was representing all of the, let's say, Black and brown and our allies in Ericsson that work here, and I had to kind of make a stand. And I remember very vividly as an African American, when I'm outside in the street, if I see a fellow African American, I'll dap them up, right? I'll walk up, pound, dap them up, hey, how you doing? I would never do that inside the 4 walls of the office. And we have our smart factory, and I was one day on a tour there, and my team also have an extension of an IT organization running the smart factory, and we were doing the floor tours, and there's some African-American employees that work directly in my organization. And I remembered I decided I was going to be intentional. And I walked up to the brother and I dapped him up on the floor, and he looked at me with this look like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I said, I just dapped you up. And there was another African American, and I went and dapped him up too.
Yeah.
Right? And I looked around and I said, okay, the ice is now broken.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
right? And for me, that's when I just started just being, again, more intentional about being myself, but doing it in a respectful way and acknowledging that, hey, I'm sorry you're going to be uncomfortable about that, but that's how my culture interacts with each other.
Absolutely.
Your culture, you shake hands all the time. That's how you react. Hey, I dap people up. That's how my culture operates.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just speaking a little further to the mask that Tony was talking about, I think as a young engineer, especially like just even in college and in the classrooms, there's very little black engineers. And we all tend to stick together and everything like that. And then you move to the professional world and it's like, how do you operate? You know, so it's sort of like a question I'm still asking myself. Where's the fine line between being all the way myself and then also just being like in the professional space and everything like that. So it's still like a work in progress for me at least. And it's just trying to figure things out. So
Sure.
I think it'll take some time, but you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
I definitely agree with what both Tony and Roderick have stated. I think being Black, being young, and being a woman, there's also another layer of additional complexities when it comes to navigating certain corporate spaces. And what I will say is when you think about it from a systemic approach, you can look at, you know, the pay gaps that exist. When you compare white counterparts to the salaries of their Black counterparts, and then if you layer in being a woman, there's a lot of differentiators that might jump out, which can create additional emotional turmoil at times. So when Roger mentioned the idea of like still trying to figure it out, I would definitely relate to that because in my experience, there were certain instances, being on the team that I support now, I'm interfacing with a lot of external partners and enterprise clients, and a lot of times, not only am I the only person of color in this space, I might be the only woman, and 9 times out of 10, I'm also the youngest. So when operating in those spaces, in the beginning, I would find myself shrinking or trying not to speak up too much, to not take up too much space, because I felt this additional layer of just imposter syndrome, which I feel that a lot of Black people or even persons of color or minorities in general might relate to, because in certain environments that weren't necessarily created with your community in mind, you can feel like, okay, I don't belong here. How did I get here? Did I earn my spot to be sitting in this space speaking with you today? And so that definitely was causing me additional stress and just additional emotional attacks that I had to deal with on a day-to-day. However, you know, moving forward, I just think that it's important that by being in these spaces and by being the representation that might not always be showcased, we're creating and we're setting up for the next generation of leaders to come into, to kind of help bridge some of those gaps. So I think that's one of the things that kind of keeps me going when we talk about being Black in certain spaces, is the fact that even though we're one of few, we will one day be one of many by being there.
That's good. I think a lot of what you especially said, Tamala, is the evolution about how, you know, being one of few, you become one of many. Being here at Ericsson, you know, from everybody who was seasoned to some of the newer, you know, employees, how do you see the evolution changing at Ericsson? You know, we obviously have the Ericsson African American Alliance. That's something that, you know, has been new within the time frame that I've been here. How do you all feel about the evolution of, you know, seeing more Black employees and Black faces throughout the hallways here at Ericsson?
It's an interesting question. I think if you just looked at pure numbers, you might be a little bit disappointed, like everywhere else. But I think what we have to be realistic about is that a company like Ericsson or these companies, they've been around for decades, right?
Absolutely.
And you can't change it overnight. It just won't happen. But what I do believe that's really positive here is that there's an awareness. And the awareness starts all the way at the top of our organization, our CEO, Nicholas. He is truly an empathetic leader. You really can tell that he wants to make a difference, and he wants to see change. I remembered he was telling us the story when, unfortunately, that George Floyd was murdered, and he lived in New York, and he had in his high-rise looking over New York City, and saw all these people out there that were protesting, right? And I remember he told me, he says, couldn't understand what was going on because in Sweden, this stuff doesn't happen, right? And to think that police would kill someone, right? It was like couldn't connect in his mind, right? And then he was really all for then, hey, he wants to make a difference. So I think if you look at Ericsson, you look at all of our Ericsson resource groups, our ERGs, you'll see representation across it's EAAA, the African American Alliance, you have the veterans, you have our Pride organization, you have our Latinos organization, you have our Next Gen organization, you know, the veterans, there's so many different organizations that are really trying to highlight and focus their people, their underrepresented groups. And I think that the company is really doing what I think a good job. Could they do it better? Absolutely. Can they do better? Can our leaders at the next level down do a better job? Absolutely, they can do a better job. But I know, I can honestly feel that the work is in play and people are aware. And the best part is, even us, doesn't matter, I'm probably most senior, but everyone on this panel has the ability to hold them accountable.
Absolutely.
And to me, that's where you make a difference.
Absolutely. I want to throw this out to Renita and Tamala. Just being singularities a lot of times in your spaces, how do you feel when just being that singular, sometimes the only singular Black woman in those spaces? How do you, go about navigating your day to day in the workspace, that is?
Right. I guess it goes back to, the greater first question that was proposed when you have to learn to take the mask off. Number one, you have to be true to yourself and be able to admit that, yes, my mask is on. I'm one way outside of this facility versus when I'm inside, right? And so you have to recognize, why is that? And to a certain degree, we're not allowed to be ourselves. But then you have to realize I'm not asking for permission anymore either, right? So I guess that would be the answer to your question.
Okay.
I am who I am, whether it's a woman or, a Black woman at that. And so this is just who I am, and I show up as who I am, regardless of how I am perceived or regardless of how I'm expected to show up. Because there is an expectation, right? And it's an underlying expectation. And so because we're aware that that expectation exists, that's what created the mask.
Absolutely.
And so, again, you just have to realize I'm not going to conform to the expectation presented. I'm going to conform to the expectations and the standards that I set for myself.
Fantastic. Tamala?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with the idea of making the intentional decision to take your mask off, excuse me. One thing that I'm really challenging myself to do is just take up space. I mean, if you are in a room, it doesn't really matter what your colleague might look like or what the spaces that you're operating look like. It's really about your ability to show up, take up space, deliver, and execute on the business. And so for me, I'm really just focused on making sure that the spaces that I'm occupying, I'm adding value so that even if, I might be the only one, hopefully I leave a good enough impression on someone where they're like, wow, Tamala, she was outstanding, really capable, strong-minded, all of those great things, because I know myself enough and I believe in myself enough and I'm confident in my ability to execute, that I don't let it necessarily dictate how I perform in certain spaces. However, I would be limiting myself if I didn't acknowledge that there are certain stereotypes and microaggressions that exist when you think about Black women in certain spaces, such as the angry Black woman, which might be a very popular trope that exists in today's times.
Absolutely.
And so personally myself, I don't feel as challenged with that, but I do know that there are certain women who might struggle with this ability of like, okay, well, if I speak up too much, am I talking too much? Just kind of those additional layer of complexities when it comes to taking up space where you feel like, okay, am I taking up too much space? Just because of some of the stereotypes that you're fighting against while being in those spaces. Another thing that can often be unique to the Black community, especially as a Black woman, is how I wear my hair. So I change my hair a lot. Typically I'm in like knotless waist length box braids, and I'll just wear them. They're like my protective style that I wear majority of the year. And I remember first like joining corporate America, I would go to certain professional seminars during undergrad, and they talked a lot about like your professional appearance and what was deemed professional hair. And I believe the Crown Act actually just passed either last year or 2021, where it made certain hair types legal in professional spaces for Black women for this exact reason. But I know for myself, just showing up, taking up space, being myself and believing that I'm capable, and then leaving the room knowing that I added value really helps me in those spaces where I might be the only one.
That's good.
That's really good perspectives. Want to kind of bounce off of that a little bit. How do you? This is for anybody in the panel. When we show up, do we feel like we have to represent ourselves to a certain extent as far as our physical, appearance? How do we feel about showing up in the physical? Tamala talked about her hair, things of that nature. How do we show up and represent still ourselves, but still in a professional way? How do you all feel about that?
I think it's true, but I'll go one step more. You represent a people, especially the higher up you go in the food chain, right? You're always concerned about what am I wearing, how am I dressed, how am I presenting myself, because if they go, look at him, he represents them, right? So if I'm not looking right, I could actually have a negative effect on everybody else in the organization that looks like me, right? So I'm very conscientious about how I dress. I'm very conscientious about I keep my beard low, and every week I shave it down because I don't want it to get too high, right? And I do have a bald head, but I shave my head pretty much every day. And when I come to work, it's a shirt, right? And the few times I wear polo, sometimes I really feel uncomfortable, right? But I'm looking around in our ecosystem, right? And okay, another leader wore one. Okay, I'm good. I get a pass. Or I see a leader wear sneakers one day. I'm like, okay, cool. I can wear sneakers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So you're looking for cues from others to make it okay for you, which is kind of weird. But that's automatic, right? Probably you guys do the same thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word weird. I would kind of say that's sad, because we shouldn't have to look for cues from others in order to be ourselves, right? So the way I would answer that question is I just make sure I show up professional.
Okay.
This is a professional environment. This is our place of business. So I just make sure I show up professional, right? And so I don't think that, there should be any type of race or connotation associated with that. You just show up, to a place of business in business attire. Now, as far as your hair and things that are unique to your ethnicity, that should be off the table.
Sure.
So long as you are in professional attire.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think just the way you look physically the way you dress and everything is an expression of yourself. As long as you fit the environment and the type of, I guess maybe if you're going to an event, you have to know, oh, this is a funeral, I have to dress this way. But I can change a little thing here and there to express myself.
Sure.
Or if I'm going to a meeting, I can throw on a suit, but I can, like Tony said, I can put on some sneakers too, just because that's more my style. And it should be okay, right? It's not affecting just the way the meeting's going to be ran or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think as long as you know the limits, you can sort of play around in it and express yourself the way you'd want to.
Right. So the limit is professionalism.
Yeah.
Just because you have style and just
Right.
because you're adding your style, it does not still mean that you're not in professional attire.
But what about dreads? What about dreads?
Locks.
Locks. What about locks? Right,
yes.
locks. I call them
There you
dreadlocks.
go.
So what about dreadlocks? Because I can tell you no names, but I know that there was an employee that was here at Ericsson. That individual had some challenges, and I was coaching and mentoring him. And even I had a bias because I didn't want to tell him, maybe your locks are playing against you. You don't even realize it, right? Because, again, you're the only one in this world, right? And you have a really big head full of thick, mature locks, right? That could be working against you because, again, that doesn't fit corporate America, right? It doesn't. And I'm even myself a little bit biased by that. Like, okay, if I had an employee that came to work with locks and I'm an African-American male, how would I react, right? Would I be all good, like normal? Or would I go and say, hey, you want to climb the ladder? you might want to consider either styling it or making it not so obvious, right? I don't know. I'll share that.
My thing is, I mean, what's the difference between a black woman having locks
agree.
versus a black man? It's
Same thing.
so you're saying either way. It's,
Either way,
you know,
same thing. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I want to maybe explore a little bit deeper when you talk
Absolutely.
about the certain obligations that the Black community might have to change their physical to fit into certain spaces. When you mention the language of like, oh, I recognize in myself that I have this bias against this person, oftentimes it's the Black individual who has to change in order to fit into the space instead of the space change. And so when we continue to create that cycle of just changing and changing to fit, what we're missing is an opportunity to correct the system, right? Because is it the individual's locks that are the problem, or is it a certain bias that needs to be addressed within that individual or the hiring practices? And so I think a lot of the times we neglect or miss the opportunity to correct and or explore improving certain systemic biases or practices that might exist in corporate spaces to create a more inclusive space or environment for Black employees.
Right. It just goes back to grooming, right? So long, regardless if it's long, if it's short, so long as if it's groomed, that's what's required of a professional environment. You need to groom yourself. Now, if it's all over your head, it would be the same as someone else's hair being all over their head, regardless of the fact if it's straight hair or if it's locked hair. At the end of the day, you didn't comb your hair. And combing your hair is required in a professional environment. So again, so long as you are professionally groomed, your style should not be limited.
Yeah, and look, I agree. I think we all on this panel would say absolutely 100%, right? That we should all be able to come to work the way we should want to work. And like you said, as long as you're groomed and you're neat.
Yes.
But I can tell you the reality is that's not what it is,
Yeah.
right? And people do judge you, whether you know it or not. And they do form like ill opinions, like it's ignorance, right? It does happen. And while I think I try to do a good job of educating my white brothers and sisters and friends about their unconscious biases, I also want to acknowledge that even as an African American male, I too have them, right? So, and I'm willing to tell you what mine are. I'm willing to admit that there's times where even I practice unconscious bias that are not cool, right? But I'm aware of them, and that gives me the ability to work through them. And what I'm trying to do is get them to do the same thing.
Awareness is where it starts.
Yeah.
Yep. If you can be aware that you have it, now you have an opportunity to work on
Awareness
it.
is where it starts.
Yeah, I think all of us have obviously some biases towards, certain individuals, and maybe their appearance isn't, oh man, why they look like that? Why did you didn't have to show up looking like that? And we've all had those situations and those appearances where it's like, oh, come on, man.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this to us? Or come on, girl, why you so it's one of those things. It just happens all the time, and we are quick to judge one another. We're our biggest critics sometimes, most of the times. And we never know what that person is going through. We never know what that person's, struggles and strifes might be, why they start to grow the locks. We are our own worst critics at times, but we never know what that person could be going through and why they start to, have the physical appearance that they may have. Absolutely. So,
And just to vote,
Yeah,
because I
absolutely.
kind of have a question maybe to pose to yourself or even the
Sure.
audience. When we see instances of maybe like a Black individual, hypothetically, who is unkempt, sometimes there's this notion to automatically be like, man, like setting the Black community back. We have this idea
Right,
to generalize an entire community based on one person's decision to show up a certain way. However, when there's other different groups that are at play, I wonder if the same type of ideology and or practice is applied, where it's like, oh wow, like I see, for example, a non-Black person who may be unkept or they look a little bit different today. Are you going to judge the entire community, or are you going to give them more empathy to be like, okay, maybe they're having a bad day? So that's a interesting question or just thought.
No, I think that's a really valid question. I think if you see somebody who is of non-Black race, I think you look at that person, as an individual. I don't think we judge that entire race on, they're setting the, for an example, they're setting the white race back, or they're setting the Mexican race or the Latino race back. I think we look at that person. If that person is unkempt, it's like, man, why does he or she look like that today? Whereas
The individual.
exactly, and whereas in our community, we look at each other as, man, you setting the whole community
of a
back,
collective.
man. You,
Yep.
why you?
Yep.
Oh man, you just
called
you
learned
killing us, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Learned behavior.
Put a lot
It
of
is.
pressure
It's
on
very
us.
much.
Learned
It's very much so a
behavior.
learned behavior. So it's one of those things that we have to break that bias in our community to say, again, you don't know what that person is going through. Why did that person wake up and decide to look like that today? He or she could be going through something.
But I think that goes back to history, right? Where Caucasians
The learned
would
behavior.
say you this, you that,
Sure.
and put us in a bucket, just like
Or you all.
like they say like all black people are the
all,
same, right?
all.
And we're
We all
not.
look alike,
We're
right,
all-
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
We all black people are the same. No, heck no, I came from the city. She came from the country. They came from
Right. Right.
all that stuff. So I think, like you said, it's learned.
It's learned behavior.
It's learned
Absolutely.
from the
It's
time
learned
you're a
behavior.
kid,
Absolutely.
right? And you realize that we all represent each other, even if we don't like it, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all judged in the
Yeah.
same bucket.
Yeah.
I was on a team actually, and it was myself and another African American female. I think we were the only two black females at the time, and they would mix our names all the time. And we look nothing alike. And so it's just, again, when you talk about this idea of like being viewed as a collective or like, oh, you all. So that's
And I
just-
can't count the amount of times I've been like mistaken for Daniel. Just 'cause we have a beard, we both wear glasses.
Yeah.
Especially when I had my beard longer, it was like, oh, are you this guy? And I was like, no, that's him. But I mean,
You
I
say
guess it is what it is.
the other Daniel, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
Hi, Ericsson audience. Thank you for tuning in to the Ericsson African American Alliance Black History Month podcast. We are concluding part 1, but stay tuned for part 2. The conversation is just getting going. So join us for the conclusion of this podcast revolving being black in the tech telecom space. Thank you.